Today, the buzzword is the cloud computing. It's an overloaded term. I think we all have an idea about what it means. Essentially, it's you take everything and the kitchen sink, as the Americans say, and you deliver it over the internet. The defining word here is internet. The cloud happened mostly because of the internet. It wouldn't have happened without the internet. It sits relatively high in the internet protocol stack. And it's essentially a natural consequence of the internet. I would, if I had to pick a different name for the cloud, I would call it Web 3.0. It's almost interchangeable. We can see the cloud as a move towards centralized computing in certain terms, and as a move also towards distributed computing in another way. And yes, we access centralized infrastructures. In that sense, it looks a little bit like the mainframe. On the other hand, our data gets dispersed all over the place.
When you think about where everything you are today is, it's somewhere out there, picking up on what Michael was saying. This will get to be more and more important for a number of reasons. First of all, your data is going to more and more define you. And there's value in there. You now have the prospect of electronic health records and the values that can come from that. But then the question is, who can see them, who can find them, and can you find them when you want them? Who do you want to give permission to see them? This will continue as data becomes richer, for example, with personal genomes. You will want to know what the health information of your parents were, just as your children and grandchildren may want to know what the health information that you have. So what I envisioned was this concept of a personal data sphere, which literally was everything that you had need for, everything that defined you, everything that the external world would refer you into. Well, right now, it's owned by Google, it's owned by Facebook, et cetera. One of the reasons it is that way is, from the standards perspective, is vendors are the people that have the primary incentive to create standards. So you have the standards, and you have the tools, and you have the access that vendors think are not only useful to you, but also economically favorable to them. So what I think we should be thinking about is, what should a personal data sphere, a personal cloud be like? And what attributes should go along with that? Well, I think first and foremost, portability. It's something that begins forming around you before you're born. It's something that should exist after you die. It ought to be portable. It ought to be redundantly backed up. It ought to be secure. That will only happen if it's conceived from the inside out, not from the outside in.
In order to deal with complexity, you have to hide it. You have to pass it on. Where does it go? Somebody has to deal with it. People like to push it somewhere else. The cloud is a very good way to do that. And if you want to have a successful cloud deployment, you have to make sure that you match the complexity with the necessary skills to handle it. And successful cloud deployments do just that.
The cloud computing is actually here now. It's happening. It's something which is already quite widely developed. So it's not a future policy option. We're doing actually policy in relation to something which is developing. And the second thing to say is, and the reason why my Commissioner and Vice President Cruz is so keen on this topic, is that it actually changes quite substantially the way that computing is delivered and used. You could say that cost reductions could be the order of 30 or 40%, or even more. One member state, which I know quite well, actually in some cases has achieved 90% reduction in IT resource costs for public service IT resourcing. And for public administrations facing austerity budgets, this has to be interesting.
What are the actual incentives for governments to move to cloud? And I'm talking now from the point of view of my government, and also, I may say, other Nordic governments at least. I cannot presume to talk on the part of all governments, but this is an example. We have this increasing cost of purchasing, running and maintaining ICT solutions. Of course, cost savings, especially on tighter budgets. We are not there yet in Norway, but we have a quite quite stringent fiscal policy. So it's not that because we are a country with no economic downturn, we have still tight budgets in the public sector. So what do we actually expect from a cloud? Well, we have some functional requirements to provision our ICT. We will have to look at life cycle costs and especially exit costs. This will be a critical issue because life cycle is life cycle, and we will be having some agreements with a provider of cloud, but if the exit cost is very high, the actual supplier exchangeability will be very low because we will not have incentive to move.
So, at the most basic level, in an open standard, what we want to see is open, transparent processes. We want to see participation that's as wide as possible. We want that to make sure that the best technologies are potentially brought to the table. We want that to make sure that the standardization process isn't being co-opted by any specific industrial perspective. Issues around standards have been recurrent in the IT sector, and really we should probably expect them also to be recurrent in the future. And frankly, we very much welcome the fact that specifically on this issue of injunctions, whether it's at the level of the ITU, whether it's within the frames of ECIS, there's a very live and constructive debate which is currently ongoing amongst the members of these organizations, precisely with a view to crafting clearer rules.
There is, I would suggest, a need for quite significant flexibility. There, as Katharina and others have pointed out, there are quite a number of different types of clouds that are implemented in different ways. There are very different types of cloud users, from individual citizens to very large corporations and governments. Their needs and the way they use the different types of cloud services are very, very different. And one has to be, I would suggest, very careful in not seeking to impose a straitjacket with respect, for example, to contract provisions that might fit in one context but not at all in others.
Europe has a number of potential advantages in there in relation to our regulatory systems. So the fact that Europe has rather stringent data protection rules can actually be a competitive advantage in the end, because with people who are using services from companies which are recognized as players and maybe recognized as providers to European governments, it's a kind of a seal of approval. These guys know how to do their business. They are dealing with the security issues properly. They are dealing with their data protection requirement issues properly. They are dealing with the issues of sustainability, which has to do with portability of data properly, and so on. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there for European cloud providers to get into the game.
You still have to have some certainty, some certification. You have to know that the system that you are putting your data in, the system that you are using, does actually what it's supposed to do. And I would like to bring that, besides open standards, I would like to bring up that in the case of the cloud, open source is even more important, because for certification purposes, people have to look inside the code. Third parties will have to look into the code. And it makes certification of cloud services a much easier process. That doesn't mean that you cannot use closed source systems and trust those, but that requires, the certification process of that requires a much more elaborate and more costly process.
Once you change to a new platform, you have a new opportunity to break up all of the oligarchies, if you will, that are in the marketplace. So we're at a point in time where either existing or new very large companies can take control of the cloud, or primarily through standards, we can create a cloud-based environment that opens up competition and decreases the likelihood of lock-in.
There is a need, there is a need for a cloud user's bill of rights. We need very short executive summary like concise term of use written in human readable form. And I'm saying that fully aware that I can disclose I'm married to a lawyer. I use services that they come with 17-page long terms of use, acceptable terms of use. This has to stop. There has to be a mandate for something that's more humanly readable and useful. There has to be data retention and recovery policies for all consumer-facing services after they reach a certain volume. You don't want to do that too early, but you certainly, as people start to use more and more of that service, there has to be clear documented ways of how to get your data back. And we need to work more on certifiable platforms that we can trust.